Welcome to the Webster World Report, a special program linking Webster University's global operations during the pandemic crisis. And now, here's our host, Rick Rockwell.
We're playing catch-up on the Webster World Report as we haven't been online since late May, and so much has happened since then. As one of our guests told me this week, the world has changed. The killing of George Floyd is what sparked that change, the killing of yet another unarmed African American at the hands of the police, this time in Minneapolis. That killing sparked peaceful protests worldwide in his memory, asking for justice. And yes, in some places those protests turned violent, with more cases of police brutality on display, along with looting and property damage. So this week, a discussion of race relations, and social justice, with one voice from Webster University System in St. Louis and another from Ghana. And we'll also discuss issues related to the coronavirus, as this podcast tends to do. But first, let's hear from newscaster Tiara Gray.
The killing of George Floyd by police in Minneapolis at the end of May has shaken the world, and Webster University is no exception. The university's chancellor, president, and chief diversity officer have issued several statements to the Webster community, calling for an end to police brutality and institutional racism throughout society, along with condemning all violence. Christa Sanders, the director of the university's campus in Accra, Ghana, reacted to the messages.
Yeah, I was really humbled by the message. I think it's really critical, and it reaffirms so much for me with Webster University that we're taking this stance.
The university affirmed and declared Black Lives Matter. The university also erected a sign with that message on the main campus in Webster Groves, Missouri. The sign also declared that the university stands for racial equality and justice. We'll be hearing more from our interview with Christa Sanders later on this program. The university's task force on transition and adaptability announced a phased return to in-person operations earlier this month. The aim is to open the main campus and all campuses throughout the Webster system to in-person operations by the fall. Safeguards and rules will be put in place to fight the coronavirus and maintain a safe environment for students, faculty, staff, and the entire Webster community. Supervisors will be returning to the main campus next week, the week of June 15th, and staff members will be returning afterward in phases, beginning the week of June 22nd. Some international campuses began their own phased return earlier, beginning last month. The campuses in Geneva, Leiden, and Accra all have opened to staff again, with social distancing rules and other precautions in place. Alex McEwen will serve as the next president of the Webster University Alumni Association. The association's board of directors unanimously elected McEwen to the post. McEwen holds 3 degrees from Webster, a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science, a Master's of Business Administration, and in 2018, she earned her Master's of Science in Cybersecurity. Not to be outdone by this podcast for the whole university system, Webster University Leiden decided to post its own series of audio reports online this past semester. This series focuses on views of global citizenship. Dr. Nives Rumenjak is the coordinator of the International Relations Graduate Program in Leiden. She was interviewed for the project.
I think it's important to have your particular identity, even in this globalized world. I think that would be the formula for happiness.
You can find the entire Leiden podcasting project on global citizenship online at the mapme.com website. For the Webster World Report, I'm Tiara Gray.
Thanks, Tiara. This week, as promised, we head to West Africa for an international perspective on the killing of George Floyd, the protests, and the shift in discussions of race relations and police brutality worldwide. Christa Sanders is the director of Webster's campus in Ghana. She joined us via Cisco WebEx from Accra, and she wanted to start our discussion by talking about the Black Lives Matter sign the university erected on its main campus this week?
The chief diversity officer did send me a shot of what was there, what has been strategically placed, and I think that speaks volumes to the world and to our network of how we feel about this issue. I mean, I think about my first time coming to St. Louis. Obviously, that was for Webster University, and I think about wanting to see Ferguson, having heard about it, what had happened there, right? And at the time, I remember our colleague, Eric Riney, had shared with me that he would make that possible for me to be able to see it. And therefore, looking at the history in St. Louis, Ferguson, and the immediate area, the surroundings, having that sign there is so critical to everything we're doing, to our mission, globally and nationally, facing the university. I couldn't think of anything more powerful than that. And I'm really proud of leadership for making that decision. It speaks volumes to Black students, faculty, staff, but to the entire community. This is such an important time in history, not just for our country, but for the world. And there's a lot of introspection going on in our country. And I think it's important to be part of a university that takes a strong stance. And we have done that, and we've done it for a very long time, for 100 years. I think the messaging that has been shared, that we've been serving the underserved, right? From the beginning, from the inception, is so critical. And it resonates, especially right now. The Black Lives Matters movement is a very important one. I think that it's important that it's also been embraced by the world. This is no longer a Black issue. It is no longer seen as a radical movement. It is about human rights, and that Black people, Black bodies, we matter. And I'm just really proud that Webster has taken the stance and that we're taking it globally. I know for our students, it's going to be a critical component of our programming. It already has been. And we have public lectures that we invite the community engaged on very important topics that are relevant. And we're currently looking at what our next public lecture is going to be here. And definitely we're going to, as I mentioned to you, focus on what has happened in these recent weeks, months, years, 400 years, one could say, of oppression of Black people, and the importance of education in this, enlightening folks, students, staff, faculty, about what is right, about social justice. I'm really excited about our future. And I think young people, like so many things, are moving this in the right direction. It is their voice, it is their generation. They have such a responsibility and accountability here. And to see them out there, I have friends with children as young as 10, 11, 12, they're out there protesting. I have white friends, Asian friends, it doesn't matter the race, ethnicity, everybody has come together. So what a unifying moment for our world amidst COVID-19. That's what's so odd, but maybe this was meant to happen this way. It has been a really challenging period. It's been a very emotional period. Personally, I'm outraged, like many people in the world, to have witnessed in broad daylight the tragic death, if not murder, of George Floyd. I think that his killing, although we know that for many, many years, police brutality has been a major issue in the United States, as has the Black Lives Matters movement. I think this is the peak for the world. And, from the stance here in Ghana, I was very proud that our president, NanaAkufo-Addo, came out very quickly to condemn the killing and to really mention that he was surprised that in the United States, which has been, a beacon of democracy, of light around the world, that this kind of racism, still exists. So in addition to this, the AU also came out with a statement condemning the killing of George Floyd and rejecting discriminatory practices towards Black people. They asked the U.S. to eliminate.
So that would be the African Union, yes?
Yes. Mm-hmm. They also came out with a very strong statement asking and rejecting discriminatory practices towards Black people, asking the United States to also eliminate all forms of discrimination based on race, ethnicity, etc. And so I can say confidently that in Ghana, everyone was outraged. Students, staff, faculty here at the Ghana campus have been outraged, but we also want to do something about it. And, in the future, we're looking at holding a public lecture that will look at the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matters movement that has now gone global, and what we can do as an institution, how young people can get involved in the movement and the protests that we see happening all over the world. So I think it's a real great opportunity for institutions like ours to get involved and to discuss social justice and how students and this generation can be part of this movement, this very important movement.
I would like to go back to the president of Ghana. I noticed that during the final memorial service, the funeral of George Floyd, that there was a statement from the president of Ghana that was read as part of that service. And so Ghana has certainly been part of the conversation as part of the reaction.
Absolutely. As I mentioned, the government here took a firm stance. I think also because we recently had the Year of Return, which you may have heard about in the media, which was an effort to bring Black people from the United States and from the diaspora back to Ghana to discover their roots. That ended actually in December of 2019. And so for just 3-4 months to have passed and the world to be dealing with this current situation, it's no wonder that he came out and condemned it. In addition to this, he indicated that the government here would permanently mount George Floyd's name at the W.E.B. Du Bois Center. And as you may be aware, the great scholar, activist, Pan-Africanist W.E.B. Du Bois lived in Ghana and died here in the early 60s. And so he's buried here. And so I think it's very, very meaningful that the president of Ghana, President NanaAkufo-Addo, indicated that the government would mount his name at that very historic and meaningful site.
I would like to go back to the Year of Return. Did not Webster have a group of students, faculty, administrators, others come as part of the Year of Return? And what could you tell us about that, please?
Yes, absolutely. We really enjoyed welcoming the scholars from Webster who were led by Professor Emmanuel Balogun. We also had our chief diversity officer, Vincent Llewellyn, and also Corey Hawkins leading that group. The students spent about a week here going to different historic sites, experiencing a number of different lectures on Pan-Africanism, getting involved in community service, communities in need throughout the Accra vicinity. They had the great opportunity to also travel to see the World Heritage Site of Elmina Slave Castle, which is the oldest and largest slave castle in the world. And I had the pleasure of being with them along the journey. I actually traveled with them, and one of my staff members, Adelina Martin, Student Affairs, to the historic sites. It was a very moving experience for these students. They also had an opportunity to connect with our students and talk about the differences as well as the commonalities between Africans throughout the diaspora and Africans. And I think that those conversations were also very, very meaningful. I think the students were not ready to leave Ghana, to go back home, to be quite honest with you. And I really hope that these type of programs will continue in the near future. It was a very, very powerful and meaningful experience for all involved.
Well, thank you so much, Christa Sanders, our guest today on the Webster World Report. She is the director of Webster University Ghana, joining us today via Cisco WebEx from Accra.
Thank you, Rick.
Coming up, more discussions of race and racism and how those themes affect the coronavirus pandemic too. More from the Webster World Report in a moment.
Webster, Thailand is an academic community. As academics, we focus on quality higher education and learning both inside and outside the classroom. Our community fosters and builds skills necessary for excelling in any one of our 8 majors. We offer undergraduate programs in business administration, computer science, international relations, management, and psychology. We also offer graduate programs in international relations, business administration, and teaching English as a second language. When you become a part of our community, you grow with peers and professors from all walks of life that aspire for progress together. To join Webster Thailand, please email us at admissions@webster.ac.th or visit our website at www.webster.ac.th for more information.
Welcome back to the Webster World Report. Dr. Jameca Woody Cooper is an adjunct professor in Webster University's School of Education, and she's also a counseling psychologist. Lately, she's been writing a lot about race and the coronavirus. She joined us via Cisco WebEx to discuss her writing, but also about racism and social justice issues too.
Well, as a counseling psychologist, our specialty is a little bit different than clinical psychologists. Clinical psychologists tend to work solely with psychopathology, so they work a lot with schizophrenics, inpatient populations, and those type of abnormal psychology issues. But with counseling psychologists, we're trained to really work on a person's issues throughout the lifespan. And one of the issues that various individuals suffer with throughout the lifespan is race and racism. So it makes sense that many of us focus on diversity and equality and empowerment issues, feminist issues, and everything that's surrounded to that. So that's really how I became interested in it. It's part of my training as a counseling psychologist at the program at Mizzou that I went to is very big on that. So ever since then, so for the past 20 years, I've kind of been working and doing lots of different issues on populations that are underserved. So I work in my private practice with geriatric patients, and then in my private practice also with people from urban communities, so low income, racial and ethnic minorities, LGBTQ, just people that are really disenfranchised. And what I found is that coronavirus has impacted a large amount of African Americans, particularly in the St. Louis region alone. And if you look at the numbers for the state, it seems that the bulk of the coronavirus cases and deaths have been in St. Louis City and St. Louis County. And we just know from the numbers that most of those people that have died from coronavirus in St. Louis, if not all, most, if not all of them in St. Louis City are African American. And that's huge when you think about the actual proportion and demographics of African Americans in this region.
So obviously, the virus has changed all of our lives at this moment. How do you see those underserved communities that you connect with reacting to the virus?
You know, it really varies. I see at the beginning, when I say the beginning, I'm kind of going back to like March. So at the beginning, I don't know that anyone was really taking this as seriously as we should have. But I think as the numbers continued to climb, people began to be more serious. However, at that time, they had already been exposed to other people and had been, they had exposed others to them. So I think it took a while for our numbers to kind of get to where they were being handled correctly. And then we also had that delay with testing centers in the St. Louis region. I think that also impacted our numbers. So I think originally people were not very serious about it, but as time went on, people became more and more serious, and they started to do the social distancing and wear masks and all of that. But I think we've seen a turn away from that here in the past couple of weeks. If you go out now, you'll notice that many people don't have on masks. And I think people assume that the numbers have gone down enough that they don't need to practice the same precautions.
So we certainly see, as you have brought up, the statistics about the impact on African American communities here in St. Louis and St. Louis County, which really are the epicenter of the outbreak here in Missouri. But also we see minority communities, indigenous communities in the Southwest, Latinos, others affected in different ways than the white community might be during this particular virus. What are the underlying causal factors in your research or in your mind about why we see these discrepancies?
Well, it's really numerous factors that play into the different numbers, but the big issues really boil down to underlying health issues and then health insurance issues. Of course, blatantly, if you don't have health insurance, you're probably not going to present yourself at a testing center to be tested, even if you know that you might have the disease. That's an issue for people. If they think they're going to have to pay for testing, they're going to be less likely to show up to try to get tested, even if they know they are showing symptoms. That's one issue. So we have health insurance. The second issue would be the underlying health issues that we see in these populations: African Americans, Hispanics, elderly. So things that they have that make them more susceptible to obtaining the disease or the virus, and then making them have a lesser, a less good prognosis. So things like diabetes, high blood pressure, smoking, overweight, obesity, poor diets, asthma, COPD. And these are issues that you see in low income, African American, and elderly populations to a great extent, so that these people are going to be more likely to catch COVID-19, and they're going to be more likely to have a worse prognosis, meaning that they're more likely to die from it, because those issues complicate the disease.
What role do you think race and racism have to do with those causal factors?
I think it's really, they all kind of go hand in hand. So because of race and racism, there are many African Americans in the St. Louis area that have had a less quality education. So those who have grown up in the city of St. Louis, their schools are seen by most people to be lesser quality, which means the schools are not funded as well. They don't have the same resources. They have poor quality teachers, which means that even if they graduate from high school, they have a lesser quality education. Then they're less likely to go to college, and they're less likely to get quality jobs. So it's like a domino effects. You're starting, that's just education alone. But if you live in poor income areas or low income areas, especially in St. Louis, you're going to be less likely to have jobs that give you good insurance. And if you have poor insurance, you're less likely to have good health care. It's just so many things that play into it, but that's just education and healthcare. There are many other elements that tie into it as well.
Your research and the research of others in bringing these topics up, that's so important to get this conversation going. Have you seen any reaction? Anyone talking about public policy or other things that would help shift the need in these underserved communities?
I haven't really heard any talks about policies that are going to change as a result of this. I know a lot of these things are still on the table. Like if we look at Medicaid for all in the state of Missouri, that's a big issue. We need more funding for Medicaid. Medicaid is the insurance that is taking care of the low income and elderly populations. Many of those that I see in my practice have Medicaid. That's one start. I haven't seen a lot of talk about that. And then also insurance for everyone will really be the place we need to go. And in this country, we haven't gotten to that place yet. You know, politically, it's tied up with these elections, and that's something that they've been discussing, but I'm not sure that big of a jump will happen with this next election.
So you shared with me that you are teaching a course for the School of Education at Webster about racism this summer. Could you tell us a little bit about that course?
Yes, so it is a course in the professional development series. Typically, we used to call them in-service courses. So professional development, these would be the type of courses that teachers or administrators or mental health professionals take in the summer to enhance their knowledge and information and learning. And so my course is going to be titled Race and Racism in the Classroom. So we're going to look specifically at how race impacts teachers and how racism impacts teachers and the students that they teach. So we'll be looking at things like racial identity and racial identity development and how that plays a part in relationships between the students and the teachers. So we're going to look at a lot of different, the historical context, of course, but we'll also look at theories and practice and how it's done and what needs to be done in the classroom to make things go a lot more smooth.
Are there some examples that you've seen or that you use in this course or that you will use in this course about race and racism in the classroom?
One of the things we can look at will be recent events. Of course, if you look at the death of George Floyd, and although it's summer, like all schools are out now, this has really been a big course in education and racism for anyone who's watching and paying attention all across the world, just not in this country. So this is an example of how just by protesting, you've seen laws and policies change in the past 2 weeks. You know, they just announced they're going to disband the Minneapolis Police Department. That's as a direct result of the videotaped murder of George Floyd and how it's impacted lawmakers, policymakers, and people in those communities. So education is also, it's not just in the classroom, it's outside of the classroom. And teachers need to be able to understand how issues outside of the classroom can be used in the classroom to further the knowledge of the students. So this could be an example that could be used. There's many things politically that you could use, but this one is a good one. Of course, you can look at the coronavirus and the health disparities, and that would be another example of racism in education. So there are many, many examples, theories, and books. I'm hopeful with George Floyd and the events that I've seen that have followed it. The protests all across the world, the removal of statues, the really laser focus on how to change policing, how to look at police funding, how to require body cams to always be on, how to charge policemen when they have wrongdoing, all the way up to the Supreme Court. So I'm hopeful that these things are occurring now. I wish they had occurred a few years ago so that we would have been spared the deaths of some of the other people that have occurred over the past 4 years, 6 years since 2014. You know, had these things occurred before then, after Trayvon Martin in 2012, then we wouldn't have to see so many people die as a result.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Jameca Woody Cooper, our guest today on the Webster World Report. She teaches in the School of Education at Webster University, joining us via Cisco WebEx from St. Louis. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. The Webster World Report will return with a fresh special on Friday, June the 26th. We'd like to add your voices to our program. If you're a student, a staff member, or a member of the faculty, reach out to us. Send us a short audio clip from your cell phone or contact us via email to volunteer to be interviewed on the program. You can find us at covid19@webster.edu. You can also send questions or comments to that email address if you want to interact about the coronavirus crisis. That address again is covid19@webster.edu. Also, check out the university's COVID-19 resources pages at webster.edu/COVID-19. The Webster World Report is now available on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and of course, SoundCloud. You can also hear the program on your Alexa speaker via TuneIn. Also, our report is featured on KWRH FM Radio 63119. That's 92.9 FM in Webster Groves, Missouri. Thanks for joining us this week. The Webster World Report is produced by students, staff, and faculty at Webster University. For news reporter Tierra Gray, associate producer Jennifer Gamich, and announcer engineer Jim Singer, I'm Rick Rockwell. Stay healthy and safe.
The Webster World Report is produced by the Global Marketing and Communications Division of Webster University and through the facilities and copyright support of Webster School of Communications. This program is copyright 2020.